I spotted them first in Chicago. These half windows protruding from the sidewalks, glass panels positioned at ankle height, peering down into rooms that seemingly had no business existing. They called them basement apartments, explained away as old coal chutes or utility access points for a city constructed in multiple layers. The explanations sounded reasonable enough, even comforting. Then I encountered identical features in Seattle, Boston, Philadelphia, San Francisco, and Denver. The design remained consistent everywhere, the depth unchanging, always featuring the same architectural details like arched tops, ornamental ironwork, and masonry perfectly matching the buildings overhead, rather than appearing as crude afterthoughts from subsequent excavation. That's the moment those comfortable explanations began feeling less like genuine answers and more like carefully memorized responses. My deeper investigation revealed an undeniable pattern emerging. These structures weren't actually basements at all. They represented ground floors, main entrances, first-story access points now buried beneath feet or even meters of accumulated earth, asphalt, and historical sediment we're discouraged from questioning. Here's what my research uncovered. Edinburgh's renowned underground city isn't technically underground whatsoever. It's the authentic original street level, buried during the South Bridge construction in the 1780s. Walking through Mary King's Close means passing through genuine doorways, windows, and rooms that once experienced natural daylight. Tour guides casually mention raising the street level as though cities routinely engage in self-burial. Rome's Basilica di San Clemente sits atop two previous churches, each constructed directly over its predecessor. Descending through these layers reveals frescoes, altars, and completely preserved architectural spaces, all deliberately buried. The official explanation cites period construction techniques, but you're clearly witnessing intentional burial rather than standard building practices. Room after room systematically sealed and filled. Savannah, Georgia's entire historic district, literally sits on top of itself. Factor's Walk in the old merchant quarter descends multiple stories beneath today's street level. This wasn't gradual accumulation, but clean, deliberate burial. Windows still gaze outward from what's now underground, maintaining their frames, glass, and complete architectural integrity. Once you recognize this pattern, it becomes impossible to ignore. The evidence spans continents. Istanbul's Basilica Cistern sits beneath the city, its columns and arches suggesting something far more grandiose than simple water storage. London contains entire neighborhoods existing below current street level. St. Petersburg's ground floors have transformed into basements. Paris, Prague, Budapest, Vienna, and Madrid all share this characteristic as old cities buried to identical depths with impossibly precise uniformity. If you're struggling to accept this, you're certainly not alone. But before dismissing it entirely, consider what comes next, because things only grow stranger from here. This is where the official narrative completely falls apart. We're told these buried levels accumulated gradually through centuries of debris, construction materials, and organic matter slowly elevating street levels. They frame it as natural urban evolution occurring universally. Except it doesn't occur everywhere. Walk through any medieval English village that never industrialized or modernized, and you'll discover the original ground floor remains at ground level. No burial, no accumulation whatsoever. These locations are equally old, sometimes even older, yet they didn't sink. So why did major cities spanning different continents, climates, and geological conditions all bury themselves to identical depths during the same time frame using matching architectural language? The depth itself raises immediate suspicions. We're not discussing inches or gradual settling. We're examining 10, 12, sometimes 15 feet of coverage, enough to completely bury entire floors and transform ornate main entrances into basement windows. And this happened rapidly, not across centuries, but within mere decades. The evidence points toward something substantially larger. Here I must introduce a term that'll make some uncomfortable: mud flood. Not a water flood, not gradual sedimentation, but rapid catastrophic mud and sediment deposition that swept multiple continents during the 1800s, burying existing cities' ground floors and forcing populations to rebuild atop the destruction. Tartaria researchers, and yes, I'm addressing this directly, identify this event as the Great Eraser, a reset moment when the old world was literally buried and a new narrative written over it. Before dismissing this as fringe conspiracy theory, ask yourself why we possess so little documentation of this supposedly gradual accumulation. Why are there no transitional periods visible in photographs? Why does every old city photograph from the mid-1800s onward display streets already at elevated levels with zero evidence of the raising process? This prompts a simple yet critical question. Where are the images of cities during burial? I've searched archives, city records, historical societies, and university collections. What I discovered, or rather failed to discover, proved unsettling. Photographs of European and American cities begin appearing significantly around the 1850s to 1870s. By then, those buried windows already existed. Streets were already elevated. Underground levels were already underground. Yet we possess almost no photographic evidence of the transition itself. No images of workers filling in ground floors. No documentation of the massive earth-moving projects necessary to bury entire city blocks. No contemporary accounts describing such an undertaking's logistics. The silence was absolutely deafening. Here's the strangest aspect. Cities supposedly raising their streets were simultaneously experiencing unprecedented growth, industrialization, and architectural documentation. Engineers photographed bridges, railways, and new construction projects. Artists captured street scenes, markets, and daily life. But nobody photographed entire neighborhoods being buried. Nobody thought to document what would have constituted one of history's largest public works projects. Now we reach the empire that supposedly doesn't exist. Tartaria appears on maps well into the 1800s, not as mythology or legend, but as a vast territory spanning much of northern Asia. Some maps label it explicitly as Tartary, Grand Tartary, or Independent Tartary. Others subdivide it into Chinese Tartary or Muscovite Tartary. Then suddenly it vanishes. Not conquered, not absorbed, simply erased from maps, history books, and collective memory. The standard explanation cites cartographic confusion, outdated naming conventions, and gradual clarification of Central Asian geography as Western knowledge improved. But what if these cities with their buried windows, impossible architecture, and uniform design language were components of something larger? What if they were network nodes we've been conditioned to forget? Before continuing, I want to hear from you. Have you noticed these underground windows in your city? Drop a comment below and share what you've witnessed, because this pattern exceeds any single researcher's documentation capabilities. Let me describe what I'm observing in these buried levels. Ornate cornices, granite lintels, precisely cut keystones, decorative brackets, and ironwork. Not utility construction or rough basement work, but finished architecture designed to be seen, admired, and experienced at street level. Montreal's underground city reveals walls with detailed masonry and arched ceilings featuring craftsmanship rivaling the structures above it. Seattle's Pioneer Square Underground Tour leads you through storefronts complete with original display windows, all buried during the city's 1890s regrading. These weren't designed for underground placement, nor were they built underground, then buried later. The construction sequence doesn't support that theory. The buildings above share foundations with structures below in continuous, integrated fashion, meaning the lower levels were finished, occupied, actively lived in, then deliberately filled. Why? Not from water damage, not slow erosion, not decades of gradual buildup, but meters of mud deposited rapidly enough that cities simply built over top rather than excavating. That's what physical evidence indicates. Here's what keeps me awake. How did cities across different continents, governed by different powers, speaking different languages, make identical decisions at roughly the same time? Edinburgh raises its streets in the late 1700s. American cities follow suit in the mid to late 1800s. European cities exhibit similar patterns, all employing similar techniques, all burying similar architectural styles to similar depths. This wasn't gradual or independent development. Official histories treat each city as an isolated case with local decisions, local conditions, and local solutions. But mapping them globally makes the pattern impossible to ignore. Were they responding to the same event, following instructions they didn't fully comprehend, covering evidence of something they were directed to erase? I've examined city council minutes, engineering reports, and contemporary newspaper accounts of street-raising projects. What strikes me isn't what they say, but what they omit. No mention of where fill material originated, no discussions of unprecedented logistics, no public outcry about burying entire businesses and lives, no debates about alternative solutions, just acceptance, as if decisions had already been made elsewhere by someone else and local authorities were merely executing a predetermined plan. In Seattle's case, the Great Fire of 1889 provided convenient cover with the rationale of _1_. But the fire didn't explain why the new street level was positioned precisely where it was. Why that particular height? Why fill the old level rather than simply building a new? The same pattern emerges in other cities experiencing convenient disasters immediately before major regrading projects. Fire, flood, earthquake, each providing justification for burial and rebuilding. Convenient timing indeed, disturbingly so. Then there's the question nobody wants addressed. How did they construct these structures initially? The buried levels display construction techniques seeming almost too advanced for their supposed era. Precision masonry, perfect arches, stone cutting and placement that modern contractors admit they'd struggle replicating without computer-aided design. Examine the granite work in these underground spaces. Single pieces weighing 10 tons or more, cut and fitted with tolerances measured in millimeters, transported from quarries hundreds of miles away, lifted and placed without modern cranes or hydraulics. The official story credits ramps, pulleys, and human labor. But where are the failed attempts, the learning curve, the progression from crude to refined? Instead, we find fully realized architectural mastery appearing suddenly in the historical record as if the knowledge arrived complete and deployment ready. This raises a simple yet critical question. Were they building according to inherited knowledge, following templates from a preceding civilization? What haunts me most is the speed of forgetting. These weren't ruins discovered by archaeologists centuries later. These were functioning cities, occupied spaces, familiar landscapes buried within living memory. Yet within a generation or two, they became mysteries, underground tours, historical curiosities with original purposes forgotten. Original inhabitants erased, original significance lost. How does an entire civilization forget its own ground floor? Not slowly, not gradually, but abruptly, as if a collective decision was made to stop discussing what came before, to accept the new narrative, to bury the questions alongside the architecture. I'm not dictating what you should believe. I'm asking you to look. Walk through your city's old quarter. Find those ankle-level windows, doorways opening to dirt, architectural flourishes meant for street-level viewing now buried beneath it. Ask yourself why. Not why they're beautiful, not why they were built, but why they were buried. Why the burial was so uniform, why it happened so rapidly, and why it's been so thoroughly normalized. The deeper my investigation went, the less the official explanation satisfied. Gradual accumulation doesn't explain precision. Urban renewal doesn't explain global coordination. Local decisions don't explain identical patterns across continents. What if these underground windows aren't evidence of cities slowly sinking, but of a world deliberately covered? What if the mud flood, whether natural disaster or something else, forced a reset? What if the civilization that built these structures, this Tartaria appearing and disappearing from maps, was erased not just from the landscape, but from memory itself? I don't know what Tartaria was. I don't know if it was an empire, a network, a shared cultural inheritance, or something else entirely. But I know cities don't bury themselves without reason. I know architectural knowledge doesn't appear fully formed without precedent. I know global patterns suggest global events, not local anomalies. And I know the silence surrounding these questions is itself suspicious. Who benefits from forgetting? Who decided which history to preserve and what to bury? And why are we so quick to accept explanations that don't actually explain anything? The underground windows remain. The buried architecture persists. The evidence hasn't disappeared. It's just been covered like everything else. What do you think happened? Was this natural accumulation, deliberate burial, or evidence of something we've been taught to ignore? The comment section is yours. The mystery persists. The windows persist. The questions persist. And beneath our feet, an entire world waits to be remembered. Where are you watching this video from? Write in the comments which city or country you are from. We would love to know who is watching with us. Share your thoughts, observations, or questions. Every comment is important. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss any new videos. Together we are creating a community of curious explorers.